Welcome to Leading Adam, episode 7 of season 2. In this episode, we're getting into something really incredible, and we're having a conversation with two guests, Mario Rangel and Andrew Adeniyi. Stay tuned. The Leading Adam podcast is hosted by me, Adam Binkerd. I've spent the last 10 years researching how a healthy human experience is the key to innovation and student retention in education, and now I'm taking to the mic to share what I've learned. Hear how I've defied the odds and transformed from a landscaper to a national expert in student success in less than 10 years. Not an educator? That's okay. Stay tuned for entertaining stories and practical takeaways about leading self, leading leaders, and leading culture. The Leading Adam podcast is co-hosted by Erica Crabtree, produced by Chris Spangle, and sponsored by 240 Solutions. Connect with us at 240solutions.com, and I hope you'll stay tuned because together we can change the world. So here we are, episode 7 of Leading Adam, and this is a special episode, and I am really excited to have this conversation with the gentlemen who are sitting with me today. And so briefly, let's introduce one another. Andrew Adeniyi. Adeniyi.
There we go. Yep.
I told you I was going to say it wrong. I've tried. We've known each other for a couple years now. Adeniyi.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get Mario involved here.
Yeah. So my name is Andrew Adeniyi. I'm first generation Nigerian American, CEO and founder of AAA Solutions, and we specialize in workplace culture and diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So super passionate about leaders creating better workplaces, and that's kind of my thing.
Yeah, first generation. That's incredible.
Yes,
that's going to probably come back.
Yeah.
This conversation. Mario Rangel, you were on episode 6. Our audience is a little bit familiar with you, but remind us, who you are, what do you do now?
Yeah, so my name is Mario, and as it relates to like this podcast here, I'm the executive director for the Intercultural and Global Office at Indiana Wesleyan. And then I was telling Andrew before we started, is like my job, what I love to do is be a resource center for students from diverse backgrounds, students that may be a little bit marginalized, right? So that's what I do. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, today, our conversation, and that's what I really hope, especially between you guys, right? It's not that I'm least important. I don't mean it that way, but I'm not an expert in this. I'm an expert in the human experience at work, organizational culture. So I'll participate in that side of it, but I'm not an expert in what I want to talk about is leaders. We're on a regular basis in an organization as a consultant. I'm dealing with this, or processing it, I should say, as a consultant, is this conversation around diversity, equity, and inclusion, otherwise known as DEI. Pretty hot topic right now.
Yeah.
Just a little bit. Just a little bit, but I want to be clear with both of you. This conversation was not oriented for clickbait.
Mm-hmm.
I don't give two craps about views. I'm not worried about that. What I am interested in is how do we help leaders process what is DEI and how do I navigate this well? And if there's a healthy human experience, is it still relevant? Right. So it seems like we should probably start. Whoever wants to go, what is DEI? Let's get a clear definition for our conversation.
Yeah, and I love that we're kicking it off this way. I think the first thing I would say is we got to say the words, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. When we talk about diversity, we're just talking about the range of human differences, right? We're all different. That shapes how we show up in the world. That shapes how we're treated. That shapes the needs that we have, our cultural backgrounds, et cetera. That's all diversity is. It's a numbers game. It's how we're different. And I think the value of diversity is diversity of thought. So oftentimes when we talk about diversity, we'll talk about race, we'll talk about gender, maybe sexual orientation, having a disability or not. But ultimately, it's about getting people together who have different perspectives because we know that leads to better outcomes. So that's diversity. When we talk about equity, we're just talking about being intentional with providing custom tools and resources for people to succeed.
Right.
So my son, for example, was just diagnosed with ADHD, this month. So we're navigating what he needs. My daughter, who is 2 years younger than him, she's going to have different needs than my son, right? That's what equity is. What do you need to be successful? And then when we talk about inclusion, that's about essentially feeling seen, feeling respected, feeling like you belong in the workplace. So before people jump to DEI and kind of their thoughts on it, I think it's important to define it like we just did and kind of break the words up and talk about not only what they mean, but why they matter. So that's how
I mean, what a great start. What are you thinking?
No, I really appreciate what you said, man. I think that's super, super, super important. So cool too, because I think, like you were saying, people don't understand what it is. It's like unless you're part of something, unless you dive in a little deeper, you really don't have a full understanding, and therefore it creates some fear. I'm scared of what I don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And I think so too. One of the things that I've been experiencing, I'll be 50 this summer, and I'm starting to understand that, like the diversity in age. Whereas before I was like, what's it matter? Now that I'm in it though, I'm like, oh my gosh, it does matter. Like, you know, I matter too. You know, he's dangerous behind the wheel, but I still have a purpose, right? But I think that now when you get in the world and you start to understand it, you realize the importance of it. And so I think that's what's hard is some people are just so outside of that that they don't understand the value of it. It was like first time coming to this podcast.
Sure.
You know, I'm walking in here going, I don't even know this is cool. This is an experience. I understand it more.
Yeah.
It becomes that experience.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. You say we fear what we don't know. And then, so we're all bringing our own perspectives into this conversation, and we need to unpack those a little bit. So I don't want to push past those. So let me go first. When you said that, it made me realize, and maybe you guys have or haven't read the book Hillbilly Elegy. Happens to be written by our current vice president, J.D. Vance. I will highly recommend this book because what it's helping you understand is the subculture that is hillbilly, right? Which is unique in its own. And it is a part of the influence of my showing up into a conversation. And part of what I realized, Mario, based on what you said, that I had to learn to shed for me is that which I don't understand isn't stupid.
You're right. Come on, man.
Because that was where that was my culture, right? And that's not a knock to my family. I don't mean it that way. But I had to shed that and realize that just because I don't understand it doesn't mean it's stupid. And I would fear that which I didn't understand. And it would keep me kind of at arm's reach. So like, as I'm participating in this conversation today, that's part of it for me, right? I show up in a certain way, and still today, after a number of years of self-work and integration into uncomfortable conversations, I still have to pause and go, you don't have to sacrifice what you believe to listen to someone else. And I have to remind myself of that. And that's because of where I come from. And that's not just because I come from white America. Right. That is the hillbilly that has been just kind of a part of my world. And I mean that not as a derogatory term, because I understand my culture now. And I'm proud of part of it. Right. And then not others. So where are you guys showing up? How are you showing up to the conversation besides the obvious, right? The color of your skin?
First, I just want to applaud you for your kind of self-discovery work and being aware and also being vulnerable enough to share that in this type of setting. I think that's powerful. For me, it's one of those things where I'm trying to be rooted in curiosity because otherwise we jump to conclusions and assumptions and judgments. And that's where we're not willing to understand something that's different than us because I don't care. I'm not curious.
Right.
So I'm in a space where I force myself as much as possible to be curious, realizing that there's value added for me that then would benefit other people as a result. And I'm stopping myself from growing and I'm stopping others around me from growing if I'm not curious. So that's what I try to lean into. As you can imagine in the work that I do, there's a lot of strong opinions and a lot of it ends up being rooted in misinformation, ignorance, right?
Right.
Fear, as you mentioned. And I try to encourage folks to be curious because I think that's one of the first steps for us to be able to come together and have a conversation. And I try to tell folks it's not about changing your perspective or your beliefs. It's, are you willing to understand someone else's?
Yeah. Right.
You can disagree wholeheartedly, but are you willing to stay engaged in the conversation long enough to at least to be able to say, I understand where you're coming from. And had I grown up like you grew up or experienced what you experienced, I may have the same views as you. Right.
100%.
And I think it starts with curiosity.
I personally believe that the most vacant and absent skill in leadership today is curiosity. I don't know that we I don't know that generally society pushes this, that we teach this as a skill. We teach so many other things about leading people, but we should start with curiosity, because it is, as you're describing, Andrew, in those moments when you show up curious, the other person feels like they matter. They feel seen. You said seen earlier. Like, how do you do that? How do you explore that? Well, you be curious.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a difference between curiosity and inquisitiveness, but that's not this conversation. What do you,
It's along the same lines. I think I totally agree, by the way. I think this is so important. I think what you're saying is cultural humility. I think that's kind of what if you put it into like a phrase.
Yeah.
And the reason why I like using it is because, in our world, we do a lot of cultural intelligence training, this type of thing. And it's like, I thought, well, what is the goal? Is the goal for me to go, man, I can learn about hillbilly culture, Nigerian culture, Asian culture? Is that the goal for me to learn? There's no way.
Yeah. That's good.
But I think what it is like you're saying, being curious and saying, hey, if I'm curious and I put myself in that posture of being humble and realizing I don't know it all, then I think that gives you room to say, I'm going to go in and respect your culture, and I'm going to respect your opinions, your beliefs. And again, it's not like everybody's scared all of a sudden like something's going to jump on them and now I'm going to have to believe the way you believe. It's like, bro, it doesn't work that way, right?
Yeah.
But on my desk, I actually keep a Rubik's Cube. And the Rubik's Cube keeps a great reminder for me to realize that if you're looking at that Rubik's Cube and it's red and I see yellow, right? You could argue, Andrew, this thing is red. And I'm like, yeah, it's yellow, but just the knowing that there's a different shade on the other side, right?
Yeah,
and I feel like when you have these human experiences and you're curious, what happens is that Rubik's Cube it shifts. Now I got a little red in my yellow, and then a little bit of white over here, and a little bit of blue from Chris, right? And I think what happens is when you do that, you realize, man, this isn't as clean as I wanted it to be, but I got so much more experience in life, right?
Yeah.
I feel so fulfilled,
Right.
Yeah. I love that.
Well, I think we've got a good start here, and kind of we're hitting some huge stuff. But let's talk about the human experience a little bit. We defined DEI, and thank you for going through
thanks for that.
each word. I think that's super important, and the way that you address those made me think, we also need to talk about the human experience. Let's unpack that, because so much of what you said is like the same stuff, different words, right? And so as we define the human experience on leading Adam and through my business, is the base human needs, right? These fundamental needs that we have emotionally to feel like we belong, to be safe, psychologically safe or vulnerable, and to have purpose. And those things play out in an organization as well, plays out a shared purpose, right? But belonging, vulnerability, and purpose, belonging, vulnerability, shared purpose are the components of the human experience. And that essence of belonging is answering that question that I matter. I fit here. I have both a community and a future with that community. Vulnerability is the willingness from the recipient side to risk and say, I don't know if that's right. It's a risk from the leader's side to say, I don't know, right? I need your input, right?
Yeah.
And then shared purpose is more than just shared reason for doing. It's clarity in how my work contributes to your work and how that contributes to us achieving together. And I think when you walk through and we put this conversation of DEI and the conversation of human experience together, the question that comes to me is if we could fast forward, right? Because I believe we can change the workforce. I believe that a healthy human experience can be the norm, and it's nowhere near the norm currently.
Yeah.
But if it were the norm, right? If that is present in an organization at its healthiest state, belonging, vulnerability, and shared purpose, how does diversity, equity, and inclusion fit into that? Is it still separate? Is it a separate initiative? Is it something that we need to understand and pay attention to specifically? Or does it blend together?
Yeah, I think the goal is for DEI as a separate entity to not have to exist. The goal is workplaces where people recognize there's value and the differences that everyone brings. And I want those differences to help minimize the blind spots that we may encounter along our journey. I think it should be embedded in leadership to ask ourselves whose voice is missing from the conversation, who's being excluded as a result of this decision, where else can we recruit for untapped talent? Those are questions that my hope is get embedded and ingrained in how we do business, how we lead people, period, to where DEI is not a thing that we need. Unfortunately, that has not been the case.
Sure.
And data continues to show people are not engaged at work. 2/3 of people are not engaged at work. And
on the low end.
Yeah. And
right.
And that's devastating to me with how much time we spend at work. We were talking about it before. And I think when there's problems that come up at work, how do we typically solve them? We get a task force together. We get a committee. We figure out goals and things like that. I think that was kind of what was behind the push for DEI. We need to do something. We don't know what. It's not embedded in how we do things. Let's create the separate entity. And for a host of different reasons, I think we never really got the proper footing to really make the type of difference that's needed. And now we're kind of in a season of pivoting. So,
well, I think I would add to that and jump in. Like I'm done leading this. Let's just talk. I would add to that. I think what we had to do in our human society is create a system to force those who don't give a damn to do something different. Right. Whereas now, it fast forward 25, 30 years, and now we're recognizing that the real push, the real need for change is leaders that care. Leaders that look at anyone across the table and see a human, period, regardless of their education, regardless of their demographic background, socioeconomics, all of that, they see a human being. And I think that's maybe what I'm hearing is if we continue progressing, can the need for the process, the system we had to create for those individuals, can it begin to fade into just, this is who we are. This is how we do things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it does. I think going back to one of the things you said, that we feel like we can hope we get to a spot where all workplaces have a good human experience. I actually don't think that's possible. I think that it's like, that's what we're striving for. I feel like because we're human, we're going to have bad leaders. Because we're human, we're gonna gossip. We're gonna do those things that are just deeply rooted into us. Like, I think one of the things I've been talking to my students about, is looking internally at yourself and realizing that, let's start there, right? Let's start there. This may be off the track a little bit, but
it's good.
It's like, because we often talk about like systemic racism, other systemic issues, but sometimes we get systemic sin in our life, right? And it's like, it's a system that we've kind of built, and we're like, we can operate in this because it's worked, but we never sit back and say, how can I fix this? Like, there's some things wrong with me. I gotta get shifted back. So I feel like there's always gonna be a need for like leadership. There's gonna always be a need for
sure.
For diverse initiatives, diversity initiatives, but. Just a thought, I guess.
No, it's interesting. I think I hear what you're saying. Like you're coming from a faith-oriented lens, which I know we all three are doing that and coming from that and recognizing that there is a piece of our design, original design, that's broken. And because of that, there's always going to be this thing. Doesn't take away from the pursuit. So I don't disagree with you at all. Yeah. Maybe it's a utopian dream.
Yeah.
But I think the part of the way is us sitting and having real conversations about what is the work we got to do between now and then. And I'm curious, Andrew, with the work you do, might not be a fair question. We'll see. What do you think the biggest barrier is? What's the most common barrier you're seeing as a consultant for this, right? You're not a part of any organization. You're a sidecar to many. So what's the biggest barrier you're seeing to progress in this particular conversation?
The biggest barrier, I think it comes down to leadership and not, lack of leadership buy-in across departments, across, the entire C-suite of organizations. And when you don't have the leadership buy-in, the foundation is cracked to begin with. And even if it's not intentionally not buying in, it could be competing priorities, right? It could be lack of time to correctly allocate, and without leadership continuing to make it a priority, it just falls down to the more immediate, the more tangible things that still need done. Sure. And that's where I think the challenge is in terms of your previous question and even your stance on that. It's without intentionality, we're not going to get there. Mm-hmm. So hopefully it doesn't have to be a separate entity, but if it's not a separate entity kind of driving this work and it's not embedded in how all leaders do the work, we're not going to get there.
Yeah, it's got to be a made priority, right?
Exactly.
It's like it seems like many times in this work, it's like a sub thing. Yep. Instead of no, this is just as important as us hitting our numbers and all these other things. Who normally invites you in? Like is it HR?
It's either head of HR or the CEO. Those are the two primary contacts typically.
So they're on board.
Yeah.
It's just sometimes with like maybe vice presidents,
typically the
directors,
the other C-suite leaders or mid-managers. But even if it's mid-managers, I still put that on the top level leaders because they're the ones that need to hold those people accountable for actually implementing the work.
It makes me think, Mario, conversation we were having on the drive down here.
Yeah.
Is perhaps we are putting too much emphasis as organizational leaders on the outcomes and not the process, right? Just in our business, because like you said, there's competing priorities, but there shouldn't be. The highest priority should be the human in the building, because out of that comes sales, out of that comes productivity. But we value more the outcome of sales, the outcome of productivity, more than we do the human who's going to produce both of those things.
Yeah.
And it's like, in some ways, we've got to kind of roll back and go, let's revisit the process. How do we even restructure as organizational leaders? How do we restructure our success metrics, right? The evaluation I'm going to give to you as an employee should be it should be 100% about what's in your control, which is the process, not the outcome. And at that point, it makes me think of the story you told in last episode with your daughter. When you understand the value of the process, then you can pause in a 60-second period to coach your daughter and invite her into the solution, right? That's your intentionality. That's that part. And I was just wondering, thinking in my head, like maybe that's part of the goal, because we can develop leaders all day long, but what gets measured gets done, gentlemen. That's how it works.
Yeah.
We got to change, I think, fundamentally, as a part of this introduction. How do we elevate the human experience, the value of a human being? I think we've got to change what's getting measured as the priority. Not that we don't measure sales. We have to measure it. Yeah, I understand that. But you hear what I'm saying? Like, how do we change what really matters in the metrics of your success? How do I know your day was successful? Well, what if metrics like how many conversations were you able to engage, right? And I know that's hard, but just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we shouldn't do something.
Yeah, it's tough, isn't it? I mean, you're dealing with you got to have that the bottom line has to be hit. Like numbers have to be hit, but you're also dealing with people. It's tough.
Yeah.
So going back to what you were talking about, do you find that the mid-level managers are more like they feel like they're just against the work, like it's an opposing view, or do you feel like it's more like, man, another thing on my plate?
Good question.
It could be both, but I think it's more of the latter for what I experience. The other thing I want to share too, though, is, the clients I'm working with, although they may have some of these challenges, I'm all about progress over perfection. So those aren't the people I'm worried about. The fact, I'm thinking about the ones that haven't raised their hand to say, hey, we need to do something about that. That's even more of a concern. So there's some gaps and there's some issues even with the existing clients that I may work with, but we'll eventually get there. They've decided to invest time in training. They've obviously brought my firm in to do work. That's a starting point to not only be aware that there's area for opportunity, but to invest resources and time in there. And we'll continue to work to kind of address some of the things that may be preventing, maximizing that potential. But it's the ones that aren't doing anything that are the biggest concern for me.
It's a good point.
Huge.
How much of the success of this in an organization, again, valuing human life, valuing humanity, How much of the success of this do you guys think is dependent on the individuals, the humans in an organization showing up as their authentic selves? How important is that in this process?
It's very important. I don't know how you quantify that, but when I think about the human experience and I just think about workplaces in general, a lot of folks haven't seen leaders model vulnerability. They haven't seen leaders show up as their authentic selves. So there's this cultural and corporate baggage that I think a lot of people carry because that's what they've seen. And even worse, some people have seen that behavior lead to the things they're striving for. Promotions, stretch assignments, recognition.
So true.
So now, and that's part of what was heartbreaking for me growing in my journey with workplace culture was I realized that it was so broken because so many people hadn't experienced great cultures. They hadn't experienced great leadership. So it's huge, right? Because it's hard to lead in a way that you haven't seen done before.
Yeah.
And maybe people haven't seen it.
I was going to ask another question. This is good stuff. What, when you go into where do you start with something like that? Like you're like, okay, here's the culture. How are we going to change it? I mean, because that's not an easy task.
Yeah.
Because I've heard culture defined like this in a training one time. It says, it's just the way we do things around here. It's like if you go around and listen to everybody, it's like, that's the way we always do it. That's the way we do things. And that becomes a culture. That's hard to change because I'm just thinking like if you came into my house and be like, hey, Mario, we need to shift your culture. Good luck with that, right? It's like, so look, how do you start that, man?
Well, in the first conversations, I want to know why they're bringing me on.
Yeah, why'd you call me?
Yeah, what's going on?
What happened?
So true.
Right? And sometimes they recognize it's a broken culture and they want to get better, but the more often, they already have a good culture. They just want to be great and get to the next level.
This is true.
Same
for me.
Which I didn't start my business thinking that would be the majority of clients I worked with. I started my business thinking there's all these cultures that are broken. I'm going to go in and kind of be Mr. Fix-It, if you will. And that's not been the case. Yeah. But usually I want to start with why. Why are you trying to address this in the first place? Then data. We're looking at handbooks, previous survey results, website, any materials they can send our way. We're reviewing. We're doing focus groups with a bunch of different people to get the qualitative data. And then we also have our own custom survey that we deploy. So that's where I want to start because I can guess what would be wrong, but I don't want to guess. I want to go off of data. And that gives us more confidence as we move throughout the roadmap to be able to say, according to these survey results, the focus group feedback, these are the common themes we're seeing, the biggest areas of need. And that allows us to prioritize as we're creating their strategic plans to say, there's 100 things we could work on, but these are the top 3 to 5 you need to work on based on the data that we've gotten. So that's usually where we start.
I like how you said the areas of need. It's not like it's a negative. You're not like going, hey, this is where you're messing up.
Right.
That's like it's areas of need.
Well, and
create this desire.
You're right, Andrew. Same experience for me. I really thought going into this and doing work around org culture and a healthy human experience that I was going to be working with companies that's a wreck.
Yeah.
But the reality is, it goes back to what I said earlier. Those who call me are those who care, right? Mm-hmm. So it always starts there. You have to care about this first. And if an executive, because you have to start with executive sponsorship. I mean, I've tried coming in at the HR level first. That's really, really hard because they've got to convince the decision maker, right? Mm-hmm. And that's fruitless at times. But when you have that executive leadership that says, I'm called you because I want to be better. I want to understand. I want to do this. It's a game changer. And I think it's out of that when you're doing those experiences and you're inviting people in, what you're ultimately doing that is kind of a subscript to this is preparing the next generation of leaders to care because they're being included. And I think for me, and I want to ask you guys this, well, if you think back to a moment that informed your leadership to be more curious, right? To be intentional. I want you to think about that because I want you to talk about it a little bit. But for me, it was what I just described. Someone sat down across the table from me, literal chin in hands, like a child, like under their hands, just sat there and said, what do you do? And they were so interested in who I was and what I was doing. And at the time, my life was a wreck. I was battling addiction. I was nothing that this individual who was a prominent business owner in our community was so interested in me. He took me to lunch every Friday for like 6 weeks and just asked, tell me about you. Wow, that's so interesting. Help me understand that more. And it was in that experience. And unfortunately, he's passed now. He's no longer with us. But when he died, my moment had happened in the sense of I recognized something in him that I wanted to be, right? But when he passed, I recognized an opportunity to step into the shoes that he left. And that was, I think that's the thing that galvanized for me. I'm going to be different because I don't care who's across the table from me. If I can look you in the eyes, you are valuable to me because that's what he showed me. And I think for me, my introduction into this, and I think my pleasure and my honor as a consultant is, yes, I'm a consultant. Yes, I work with executive teams. Yes, there's that side of it. But it's every interaction that I have when I'm on campus, whatever that is, university, municipality, restaurant, doesn't matter. Everyone I interact with, I want them to feel like, man, I was the only person that dude was talking to right then, because that's how someone made me feel. Because I know they will go on and do something and that will stick with them, right? Like it did with me. So I'm curious with you guys. That's my, origin story. It's not right. But that was the moment, right? There was things before that, but it was always around what Ross did for me. His name was Ross. Incredible individual. What about you guys? How did you step into being intentional, being curious? Why do you prioritize it? What happened? Was it a thing? Was it a moment?
Yeah. For me, I think it's just like I was telling last time we talked about, like, it's a passion for me because I was that kid that felt marginalized, right? And just family, I mean, just a rough upbringing, and all that brings into it. But then also just like being Hispanic in Grant County when there's really nobody Hispanic at that time, that also kind of put me, I was like, what in the world? How do I fit in here? These types of things. And then, so I think that gave me a heart and just made me see people, man. I'm like, man. And part of what I really enjoy, like I was telling you before, like my cold chill moments, I think are when I realize, I tell students to do this. I'm like, they go like, I don't know what I want to do in life. And they start describing things to me. And I'm like, that's a job. That's not what you're going to do in life, right? That's the job. I want to be a nurse and that's a job. What do you want to, who are you?
Who do you want to be?
And so I tell them, it's like, start a notes on your phone. And then when you have a cold chill moment, when you get excited, man, maybe you do get cold chills or you're in your element, jot it down and you'll start seeing themes. Oh, it's
good.
This is really this is me. This is what I was born to do. And then don't get it twisted because you need to hone that skill in.
For sure.
Right? Because you might be gifted at something. It doesn't mean you're going to make it to the NBA. Right. So for me, what I noticed that my gift is being able to see people that were hurting or see people that needed access, needed an opportunity and saying, man, can I help you get there? It's just like that coach's mentality, being able to see little things and to break it down practically so somebody can understand that. Because it's like we were talking on the way down here. It's like, what do I need to work on? Or what do you need to work on? I need to be a better communicator. Great. We all do. What does that look like? Give me the details on how that's going to play out.
Right.
And I feel like that's what God has called me into, is saying, see somebody, but don't just say, hey, man, you got to pull up your bootstraps and work harder. How?
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
So I think that's how I got into this line of work. And what's crazy is I've been doing this kind of work my whole life. It's just now I'm actually have a job that's titled and I'm paid for it.
Yeah.
That aligns with it. Yeah, so I had the pleasure of working for an international retailer right out of undergrad. And the division I worked for in Indiana was a top 3 division out of over 20 divisions nationwide. And great culture, great leadership, great everything. And I went to the East Coast after working there for a few years and worked for one of the worst divisions of the company across the nation and was blown away by how different it was. And one example to give you is I remember, we were top 3 division in Indiana, and we had like a 3-month stretch where our sales, our productivity, all of our key metrics we would evaluate were trending down, and we were middle of the pack nationwide. And our VP came in our district manager meeting and basically sat in the whole meeting and talked about how, excellence is our average. This is unlike us. She wanted to hear from us what was going on. She met with each of us individually after the full day meeting. And the tone of the meeting was very much, help me understand how I can best help you, because we got to get better, right? How can I best support you was basically the energy behind it. I went to DC, and she sent me a handwritten note with my initials leather engraved on a wallet, basically saying, you're going to do great, encouraging me. That's the type of leader culture she fostered. In DC, again, they were notoriously bad. There's a culture of fear. And I remember 6 months into my stint there, the VP sat down at a district manager meeting with us. We were eating lunch. He had no idea how long I'd been in his division. He didn't know what stores I was overseeing. He knew nothing about me. I remember thinking, I uprooted my whole life to come help your sorry division. You know nothing about me, but my VP from across country took time to write a handwritten note and send me a leather engraved wallet and give me words of encouragement. And I said, that's the difference between the cultures. That's the difference between the performance. You're not going to see it in an email. You're not going to see it on the spreadsheets, the intangibles. But that's the reason why people are ready to run through a wall for our VP leader, and why their turnover, sales, and every other metric in the book was terrible on the East Coast. And that is what sparked a fire in me to say, I wonder what other cultures are like. And I started looking at Gallup results, and I was in my master's program at the time online, and started to realize, oh, wow, what I experienced in Indiana is a rarity. That's not the norm. And that broke my heart.
Yeah, for sure.
So I had to figure out, what am I going to do to change that? And that's what started my consulting and speaking career around workplace culture.
It's cool how you got a passion from that, though, because you experienced it, you lived it.
Yeah.
Well, and the difference you just outlined, Andrew, between what I shared and what you shared is you experienced it as a part of a team, which is incredible. It's super rare. I experienced it in an individual conversation with a guy I didn't even work for. Right? He's just a businessman in the community that took an interest in me. But it was the same experience. I thought, this is how it's supposed to be.
Yes, how did I duplicate that?
And then realizing that ain't how it is.
Yeah.
It's how it should be,
but it's
not how it is. The same realization, and then going, okay, then how do I live it? How do I live into it?
Thanks for joining us here at the Leading Adam podcast. We hope you found inspiration and hope to see you again next time. Leave us a comment on YouTube, or if you have an idea for a future episode, let us know that too. You can connect with us at 240solutions.com. Thanks, and we hope to see you again next time.